Salt is more than a seasoning, it is a symbol of safety and sanctity across many cultures. It marks boundaries where peace and security dwell. Throughout history, salt has held a sacred place, not merely as a commodity, but as a powerful element woven into the fabric of human experience, signifying protection, preservation, and purity. When we look deeply, we see that salt is a universal language of safety, a marker that says, here you are protected. Here, harm cannot come. Consider how many ancient peoples viewed salt as a divine gift. It was not just something to flavor food, it was a sacred substance used to guard homes, lands, and hearts. In many traditions, salt was sprinkled at the threshold of a house, creating an invisible line that evil could not cross. It was believed that salt held the power to repel malevolent forces, to keep spirits at bay, and to maintain a sanctuary where families could rest without fear. This practice speaks to the human longing for secure spaces in a world often fraught with danger and uncertainty. Salt's power to protect goes beyond superstition. It represents purity. Salt has the unique ability to preserve, to stop decay. Spiritually, this preservation is reflected in the human desire to safeguard what is good, to keep corruption out, and to maintain the integrity of our environments and relationships. Just as salt prevents physical spoilage, it also symbolizes a protective barrier against moral and spiritual decay. This is why so many cultures infuse their rituals with salt. It is a tangible reminder that protection is necessary not just for our bodies but for our souls. When we observe the use of salt across different cultures, a fascinating pattern emerges. It is a symbol that transcends geography and ethnicity. For example, in some African traditions, salt is used to mark safe zones during ceremonies, creating a sacred space where no harm can come to those within. In Japan, salt is often sprinkled around sumo wrestling rings to purify the area, ensuring that the combatants engage in a sacred and protected arena. In Middle Eastern cultures, salt is shared as a symbol of trust and friendship, a covenant of peace that binds people together. These diverse expressions all point to the same truth. Salt is a universal language of safety and sanctuary. The act of sharing salt, in particular, carries profound meaning. It is an ancient gesture of hospitality and trust. When two parties share salt, they are not just sharing a mineral. They are entering into a covenant of peace, an agreement that the space between them is safe. This simple act echoes the human need for connection and security. It says, you are welcome here. Here you will not be harmed. In this way, salt marks not only physical safe zones, but also relational safe zones, spaces where people can come together in trust and mutual respect. Beyond the symbolic, salt has practical uses that reinforce its role as a protector. Historically, salt was essential for preserving food, preventing it from spoiling and causing harm. In many communities, it was a valuable resource, often guarded carefully and used to maintain health and safety. Its preservative properties made it a tool to extend life and protect nourishment, which in turn strengthened families and communities. Over time, this practical value evolved into symbolic meaning, where salt became a mark of safety, physically and spiritually. The presence of salt in these diverse practices calls us to reflect on how we establish and protect safe zones in our own lives. Just as cultures around the world have used salt to mark places of peace, we too are called to create environments, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, where safety and trust prevail. This might mean setting boundaries in relationships, cultivating spaces of honesty and respect, or guarding our hearts from negativity and harm. Salt teaches us that protection requires intention, that safe zones do not appear by chance, but are established through conscious acts of care and preservation. Moreover, salt reminds us that safety is not just about exclusion, but about invitation. Safe zones marked by salt are spaces where people are invited to come, to find rest and peace. They are not walls built to isolate, but borders drawn to protect and welcome. This challenges us to think deeply about the balance between safeguarding ourselves and opening ourselves to others. True safety, marked by salt, involves both protection and hospitality, a sacred balance that nurtures community and belonging. As we reflect on the symbolism of salt, we realize it is a powerful teacher. It calls us to honor the sacredness of safe spaces in our lives and communities. It reminds us that protection is not merely a physical matter, but a spiritual one requiring vigilance, purity, and hospitality. Salt, simple and humble, carries within it the profound message that safety is essential for life to flourish. It invites us to mark our own safe zones with intention, to be guardians of peace in a world that often lacks it. Salt has traveled through time as a symbol of protection, a covenant of trust, and a beacon of sanctuary. Across cultures and continents, it continues to teach us that the places we call safe are sacred, and that it is our responsibility to preserve, protect, and honor these spaces. In understanding the role of salt, we come closer to understanding how to live in harmony with one another, creating safe zones not just with minerals, but with hearts grounded in love and respect. Salt represents purity and preservation, guarding spaces against harm, decay, and negativity, much like the way faith guards our souls. When we think about salt, we often focus on its physical qualities, how it seasons food or preserves meat, but its deeper significance goes far beyond the material. Salt is a powerful symbol of purity, something that cleanses and sanctifies the environment it touches. Just as salt purifies and preserves, so too does faith cleanse and protect the human spirit from corruption and decay. In many cultures, salt is sprinkled in rituals to clean spaces, to remove negative energies, and to create a sanctuary where only good and wholesome things can thrive. This act is not just symbolic, it is an outward expression of an inward desire for holiness, safety, and order. Salt stands as a reminder that purity is essential to life, that without it, things deteriorate and fall into chaos. When salt is scattered, it's a declaration that this place is set apart, free from the contamination of evil or harm. This spiritual power of salt parallels the protective role of faith in the life of a person. Faith, like salt, guards the soul. It acts as a shield, keeping negativity, fear, and despair at bay. Just as salt preserves food from decay, faith preserves our hearts and minds from the destructive forces that seek to bring us down. It is a guard against spiritual corruption, a source of strength that keeps us grounded and secure. The presence of salt in sacred rituals mirrors the presence of faith in our daily lives, a necessary element that transforms the ordinary into the holy. Salt's preservation is not passive, it is active and intentional. It works quietly but powerfully to maintain life and health. Similarly, faith requires action and commitment. It is not merely belief, but a force that protects and sustains. Without salt, food spoils. Without faith, the soul becomes vulnerable. This analogy teaches us that just as salt must be applied regularly to maintain its effect, faith must be nurtured continually to keep us pure and protected. When we observe how salt is used to guard spaces, we see the human instinct to protect what is valuable. Salt is scattered around homes, sacred places, and even individuals as a boundary against evil. This practice demonstrates an understanding that life itself is fragile and must be safeguarded. The purity salt brings is a physical reminder of the spiritual purity we must seek, a purity that guards us from the forces of harm and negativity. It shows us that protection is holistic, encompassing both the physical and the spiritual realms. Salt also symbolizes covenant, an unbreakable promise of protection and preservation. In many ancient texts, salt is linked with enduring agreements, signifying that just as salt does not lose its flavor or power, so too does the promise of safety remain firm. This teaches us that the spiritual protection salt represents is not temporary but eternal. It calls us to hold fast to purity and integrity in every area of life, knowing that these are the foundations of true safety. In embracing the spiritual power of salt, we are reminded that our environments, relationships, and even our inner selves must be guarded carefully. Negativity and harm often come subtly, like decay that starts unseen. Salt, in its spiritual role, challenges us to be vigilant, to cleanse what is impure, and to preserve what is good. It invites us to create sacred spaces in our hearts and communities where faith can flourish, where purity is upheld, and where protection is assured. Ultimately, salt's spiritual power is a profound metaphor for the life we are called to live, one marked by purity, preservation, and protection. It is a call to reject what harms and embrace what nurtures. It reminds us that just as salt is essential for sustaining physical life, faith is essential for sustaining spiritual life. The two are intertwined, and together they create a fortress of safety and holiness where life can thrive in fullness. From ancient rituals to modern customs, salt is used to create zones of safety, sanctuaries where people feel protected from evil or danger. This practice spans continents and centuries, revealing a profound understanding among diverse cultures that salt holds a sacred power to mark boundaries between the safe and the unsafe. Whether in the quiet corners of a home or the vibrant ceremonies of a community, salt serves as a bridge between the physical and the spiritual, a guardian that secures peace and wards off harm. In many ancient societies, salt was not just an ordinary mineral, but a sacred tool used in rituals to define safe spaces. These were places where the spirit of the people could rest, recover, and renew without fear. For example, in some indigenous cultures, salt was scattered around villages or sacred sites to form a protective circle, an invisible barrier that evil spirits or harmful forces could not penetrate. This ritual was more than tradition, it was an act of faith, a declaration that within these boundaries, safety reigned and the well-being of the community was preserved. Modern customs continue to reflect this ancient wisdom. In some parts of the world today, salt is still used in homes as a safeguard against negativity. People sprinkle salt at doorways or corners of rooms, believing it absorbs and neutralizes harmful energies. It is a daily practice that carries deep cultural resonance, a tangible way to claim space as a sanctuary amid the chaos of life. This shows us that the symbolism of salt as a protector is not just historical, it is alive, relevant, and meaningful in our contemporary world. Salt's role in creating sanctuaries is also visible in religious ceremonies across various faith traditions. Whether in the sprinkling of holy water mixed with salt, or in the use of salt during purification rites, salt symbolizes the setting apart of a sacred zone. These acts invite a spiritual presence to dwell in these spaces, making them not only physically safe, but spiritually fortified. The use of salt here speaks to a universal human desire to be safe not just from physical harm, but from spiritual and emotional threats. What is striking about these cultural expressions is how salt transcends language and geography. From Asia to Africa, from the Americas to the Middle East, salt carries this consistent message of protection and sanctuary. This universality suggests that deep within human consciousness, there is a shared understanding that safety is foundational to life, and that salt, in its purity and preservative power, is uniquely suited to mark and maintain that safety. Furthermore, these practices remind us that safety is both a personal and collective concern. Salt is used not only to protect individuals, but also to safeguard entire communities. It creates zones where people can gather, celebrate, worship, and heal without fear. This communal aspect of salt symbolism teaches us the importance of creating and maintaining safe environments for one another. Safety is not merely an individual pursuit, but a shared responsibility, one that builds strong, resilient communities. Salt also serves as a reminder that safe zones are not passive spaces but active ones. They must be maintained, protected, and renewed. The act of sprinkling salt is a deliberate, mindful gesture, one that calls for awareness and intention. It challenges us to recognize that safety requires effort, vigilance, and a willingness to stand against forces that threaten peace. In this way, salt becomes a powerful symbol of resilience, a mark of determination to preserve what is good and holy. In understanding how different cultures use salt to create safe zones, we gain insight into a universal human truth that safety, peace, and protection are essential for flourishing. Salt, with its enduring symbolism and practical uses, embodies this truth. It teaches us that safety is sacred, that it must be honored and guarded with the same seriousness as life itself. This lesson, passed down through generations and across cultures, calls us to be intentional about the spaces we inhabit and the sanctuaries we build, both around us and within us. Sharing salt is a timeless gesture of welcoming and establishing safe relationships, a divine contract of peace. This simple act, humble in appearance, carries with it a profound meaning that transcends time and culture. When people come together to share salt, they are doing more than exchanging a mineral. They are entering into a sacred agreement, an unspoken promise of trust, safety, and mutual respect. It is an ancient way of saying, here you are safe. Here you are accepted. Across history, salt has been used to seal covenants, binding people in relationships of peace and hospitality. In many cultures, offering salt to a guest was a way to demonstrate that the guest was honored and protected under the host's care. It symbolized a commitment that neither harm nor betrayal would come between them. This tradition speaks to the deep human need for trust and belonging, for spaces where one can lay down defenses and find refuge. The covenant of salt is more than a social custom. It is a sacred bond. Just as salt preserves and guards against corruption, the sharing of salt symbolizes the preservation of relationship, the guarding of goodwill, and the protection of peace between people. It is a reminder that relationships, like salt, must be handled with care, that they require integrity and commitment to endure. When salt is shared, it is an act of vulnerability and openness, an invitation to enter into a safe space where honesty and respect reign. This gesture also carries a spiritual dimension. Salt, in many traditions, is associated with purity and holiness. To share salt is to invite purity into the relationship, to commit to a connection that upholds truth and righteousness. It is a call to honor one another not just in words, but in actions, to build relationships that reflect divine principles of love, faithfulness, and peace. Furthermore, the act of sharing salt establishes boundaries that protect relationships. It is a covenant that draws a line between peace and conflict, signaling that the parties involved choose to walk in harmony rather than discord. This sacred boundary fosters an environment where trust can grow, where healing can take place, and where unity can be forged. It reminds us that safe relationships do not happen by accident. They are cultivated intentionally through acts of commitment and respect. In today's world where distrust and division often run deep, the symbolism of sharing salt offers a powerful lesson. It challenges us to be deliberate in our relationships, to seek and extend hospitality in ways that build safety and trust. It calls us to remember that peace begins with simple acts of openness and acceptance. Gestures that say, "You are welcome here, and I am committed to your well-being." Sharing salt also invites us to reflect on how we create safe spaces within our communities and families. It encourages us to cultivate environments where people feel honored and protected, where relationships are safeguarded by mutual care and respect. This ancient practice reminds us that the foundation of a peaceful society is built on countless small acts of trust and hospitality, each one a covenant of salt. Ultimately, the covenant of salt is a timeless invitation to build bridges rather than walls, to foster connection rather than division. It is a sacred promise that when we share with one another, we create safe zones not only in places but in hearts. This powerful symbol calls us to live lives marked by hospitality, integrity, and peace, carrying forward a legacy that has sustained humanity through the ages. Salt has been used physically to cleanse, preserve, and mark territory, a practical tool that grew into a sacred emblem. At its core, salt's value was born out of necessity. It was essential for survival. People understood that salt preserved food, kept it from spoiling, and ensured that families and communities could endure through seasons of scarcity. This practical utility laid the foundation for salt's deeper symbolic meaning, transforming it from a mere mineral into a powerful emblem of life, security, and order. In communities around the world, salt was often used as a cleansing agent. Before entering a home on special occasions or during rituals, salt would be scattered to purify the space, clearing it of impurities both physical and spiritual. This act of cleansing was rooted in the belief that salt held a unique power to ward off decay and evil influences. By physically removing dirt and contamination, salt symbolized a fresh start, a restoration of purity and safety. This use of salt teaches us that practical actions can carry profound spiritual significance when infused with intention. Salt also played a vital role in marking territory. In times when borders were fluid and disputes common, salt was a means of establishing boundaries. Communities would scatter salt along the edges of their lands, signaling a claim to that space and a declaration that it was protected. This was not only a practical way to avoid conflict, but also a symbolic act of stewardship, an acknowledgement that the territory was sacred and worth defending. Salt, in this sense, became a guardian of space, marking safe zones where people could live, work, and thrive. The preservation properties of salt further reinforced its symbolic importance. Just as salt prevented physical decay in food, it came to represent the preservation of community values, culture, and identity. Salt was a reminder that what sustains life is not just physical nourishment, but the preservation of what is good and lasting within a people. This dual role as a preserver of food and a preserver of community made salt a powerful symbol that links survival with sacred responsibility. Over time, salt's practical uses became intertwined with ritual and tradition, elevating it from a common resource to a sacred emblem. Salt took on meanings that spoke to the human experience of protection, purity, and trust. When communities used salt to clean spaces or mark boundaries, they were not only protecting themselves physically, but also asserting spiritual authority over their environment. This blend of the practical and the symbolic teaches us that everyday actions, when rooted in deeper understanding, can become powerful expressions of faith and identity. This history challenges us to see the ordinary with new eyes. What practical tools or habits in our lives carry a hidden sacredness? How do the everyday things we use reflect deeper truths about protection, preservation, and belonging. Salt invites us to be mindful of the spaces we inhabit, encouraging us to cleanse what is harmful, preserve what is valuable, and mark the boundaries that safeguard our well-being. In our communities today, the legacy of salt reminds us that safety and order are not accidental. They are the results of intentional practices that honor both physical needs and spiritual truths. Whether it is setting clear boundaries, maintaining purity in our relationships, or preserving our values, we are called to live with the wisdom that practical actions can become sacred commitments. Salt's journey from a practical necessity to a sacred symbol is a powerful lesson in transformation. It shows us that the tools we use to survive can also be tools to thrive, that protection and preservation are woven deeply into the human story. As we reflect on salt's role in communities past and present, we are reminded to live intentionally, embracing both the practical and the spiritual in all that we do. Just as cultures mark safe spaces with salt, we are called to create, protect, and honor safe zones in our own lives and communities, rooted in integrity and love. This is not merely a suggestion, it is a profound responsibility. Safe zones are more than physical places. They are sanctuaries for our hearts, minds, and spirits. They are environments where trust flourishes, where healing happens, and where growth is nurtured. Just as salt has been used across generations to declare safety, we too must intentionally mark and maintain spaces that reflect peace and security in our personal and communal lives. Creating these safe zones requires intention and courage. It demands that we set boundaries, clear lines that protect us from harm, negativity, and chaos. Boundaries are not walls of isolation, but protective borders that preserve dignity and respect. When we mark our safe spaces with the principles of integrity and love, we build environments where vulnerability is met with kindness and where differences are honored rather than feared. This calls for self-awareness and discipline, for recognizing what undermines peace and having the strength to remove or transform it. Protecting safe zones also means being vigilant. Just as salt's protective power requires renewal and care, our safe spaces must be nurtured consistently. We must guard them against toxic influences, whether those come from external threats or internal conflicts. This vigilance is an act of stewardship, a commitment to preserving what is good and holy. It reminds us that safety is not a given. It is cultivated and maintained through our choices, actions, and relationships. Honoring safe zones extends beyond ourselves. It means respecting the safe spaces of others, recognizing their right to peace and security. This mutual respect builds community and fosters harmony. When we honor the safe zones of others, we contribute to a culture of care and trust that strengthens the fabric of society. This collective responsibility is a powerful force for good, one that can transform environments marked by fear and division into places of hope and reconciliation. The call to recognize and protect safe zones also challenges us to reflect inwardly. Our hearts must be safe zones, places free from bitterness, anger, and fear. Just as salt preserves and purifies, we are called to cultivate inner sanctuaries where grace and peace reign. These inner safe zones empower us to face life's challenges with resilience and compassion. They enable us to be sources of safety for others, extending the protection we have cultivated within. In honoring safe zones, we acknowledge that safety is foundational to flourishing. Without safety, creativity, trust, and love cannot grow. Just as salt was used to mark sacred places where life could thrive, we are tasked with ensuring that our lives and communities are marked by security and respect. This is not passive. It is active participation in the work of peace-building, reconciliation, and healing. Ultimately, the call to create, protect, and honor safe zones is a call to live with purpose and intentionality. It is an invitation to be guardians of peace in a world often shadowed by fear and uncertainty. By embracing this call, we participate in a timeless tradition that honors the sacredness of safety and the power of love to transform and sustain. In doing so, we create legacies of hope and sanctuary for generations to come. As we reflect on the profound journey of salt, its power to protect, to preserve, to mark safe zones across cultures and generations, we are reminded that the principles behind this humble element are not just ancient customs but eternal truths. Salt teaches us that safety is not accidental, it is intentional. It is a sacred covenant, a spiritual reality, and a practical necessity. In the same way that salt marks boundaries and forms sanctuaries, we too are called to be the custodians of peace, the architects of safe spaces in our homes, communities, and hearts. Let us rise to that calling with purpose and passion, Let us live with integrity, love, and vigilance, understanding that our commitment to protect safe zones is a declaration that life matters, that dignity matters, that faith matters. This is the legacy we inherit and the legacy we must leave. A world where safety is honored, where trust is sacred, and where love reigns supreme. May we never underestimate the power of these sacred spaces, for they are the foundation upon which dreams are built, where character is formed, and where destiny unfolds. Just as salt preserves what is good, may our lives preserve what is true. And as we walk this path, may we be ever mindful that to protect safe zones is to protect the very essence of life itself.